The helmet sealed. The first sound Darth Vader ever heard inside the suit was his own breathing. Then came his master's voice, telling him Padme Amidala was gone. In a matter of minutes, Anakin Skywalker had lost his wife, his body, and the last version of himself that still belonged to him. The armor kept him alive, but every movement inside it felt wrong. Each breath scraped painfully through the respirator, the mechanical limbs answered a fraction too slowly, and the pain never fully faded into the background. Palpatine gave him no time to adapt. 4 standard weeks after Mustafar, the Emperor gave the suit its first test. A contingent of clone troopers on the planet Mercana had refused to fire on 3 Jedi survivors. The names were Roan Shrine, a veteran of the Clone Wars, his apprentice Bolchatak, and Chatak's young Padawan Oli Starstone. The clones had served under Shrine for years and had chosen their old generals over their new orders. The Empire could not allow that line of thinking to spread, and so the Empire sent Vader. Chapter 1: Born in Fire. Bolchatak fell first, on Mercana. Vader took her weapon arm in a sweeping arc, and her life immediately after. The hunt carried Vader from Coruscant to Alderaan, where Bail Organa was already helping surviving Jedi disappear. From there, it led him to Kashyyyk, the Wookiee home world, already being turned into an Imperial labor camp. In the Burning Force, Vader caught up to Roan Shrine. Shrine held on long enough to face the Sith Lord directly, and in his final moments he learned the truth. The Emperor was Sidious. The man behind the mask had once been Anakin Skywalker. Then Shrine was gone. Struck down inside a forest, the Empire was already burning to the ground. Starstone slipped away in the confusion. This was the suit Palpatine had built. The chest panel, the central cable, the organ implants, and the respiratory linkages, all laid out in dark lore. The Rise of Darth Vader, were built with a strange kind of fragility. The Kunin cartridge in Vader's collarbone dulled the pain, but never erased it. The respirator was loud on purpose. And when Vader had tested his master in the first hour after Mustafar by reaching out with the Force to choke him, the answer had been Force lightning straight through the armor that nearly stopped his heart. The Dark Lord could not even use lightning offensively after that day. The suit was not built to make him invincible, it was built to make him obedient. While the Mercana hunt was still unfolding, an older Jedi named Shadé Potkin had been setting a trap of her own. In the one-shot Star Wars Purge, Potkin had gathered 7 other Jedi on the prison world of Kessel and seeded the rumor that Obi-Wan Kenobi himself would attend. The bait was perfect. The Dark Lord arrived with a contingent of clone troopers, walked into the ambush, and learned within the first seconds that the Jedi were ready for him. Some carried Cortosis blades, an ore that could short out a lightsaber on contact. Sui Choi did what no Jedi had managed since the fire on Mustafar. He took Vader's sword arm in a single stroke. Choi later threw his own weapon and cracked the faceplate over the eye. Boltar Swan refused to strike the disarmed Dark Lord. Kofi Arana, less merciful, ended her instead. Vader, recovering, ripped Potkin's Cortosis blade out of her grip with the Force and drove it through Arana. 5 of the 8 Jedi fell to the Dark Lord directly. The remaining 3 were cut down by his clone stormtroopers under the command of Commander Bo. Potkin's strap had cost her everything, and the Jedi gathered to end the new threat were gone within minutes. 50 Jedi, the propaganda reported, had been hunted down single-handedly by Darth Vader inside their hidden nest on Kessel. The larger number was the one the Empire wanted the galaxy to believe. Every Jedi failed to end Vader because they thought Obi-Wan was the bait. Within weeks, the Dark Lord would learn that his own master was setting traps of a different kind entirely. Chapter 2: Building the Empire. The young man stood in the assembly house on Serenno with a blade in his hand, looking down at his father. The old man did not run. He understood by then what Vader had brought to the home world of the late Count Dooku, and what the alternative was if his son refused. Rodas Borgin struck first. One by one, the heirs of Serenno's great houses followed his lead, turning their blades on the fathers who had ruled before them. In the comics, agents of the Empire hard targets, the cleansing of Serenno had taken place in the first months after the Clone Wars. Vader's stated reasoning was that the rest of the galaxy had suffered, and now Serenno would suffer too. By the end of the Purge, Adan Dooku, raised off-world and untouched by the bloodshed, had been installed as the new Count. The cleansing vanished into Imperial record. The The galaxy was told that Serenno had simply chosen its side, and Vader had done it without specific orders from Palpatine. While the cleansing of Serenno was concluding, the Empire was already turning its attention to another world that would prove far more useful to Vader personally. The planet was Honoghr. In Heir to the Empire and Dark Force Rising, a separatist Lucrehulk core ship named the Gehenna had crashed into Honogr's surface during the final days of the Clone Wars, breaking open and releasing a toxin called trihexylophene in 1138. The planet's ecosystem was dying. The native species, the Noghri, were a small, gray-skinned, intensely territorial people whose entire warrior caste had grown up with edged weapons. When Vader's transport arrived to inspect the contamination, the Noghri did exactly what their culture demanded. They eliminated a stormtrooper escort with knives. Vader survived the ambush, and he was impressed by it. The deal he offered was simple. The Empire would send decontamination teams, restore the soil, feed the survivors, and pull Honoghr back from the edge. In exchange, the Noghri would serve. The Empire never restored Honoghr. The soil remained poisoned, the harvests kept failing, and the Noghri became dependent on the Empire for survival. Their young warriors were taken off-world and trained as death commandos. Their existence was deleted from official Imperial records. They serve Vader and Palpatine directly. They call Vader Savior in their own language. They called his bloodline Malariush, and the recognition would matter decades later when an Alderaanian senator's daughter walked into their camp and they smelled their savior on her. Vader now had a private army no one in the Empire knew existed. The problem was that the Empire did not need a private army of Vaders. The Empire had millions of stormtroopers, a navy spanning the galaxy, and a sitting emperor who was watching everything. The same emperor whose life Vader was about to be required to save. In Darth Vader and the Ghost Prison comic, the investigator was General Gentis, the headmaster of the Imperial Academy on Coruscant. Gentis was a believer by background, but his belief had been ground down by the realities of Palpatine's regime. The Emperor's tactics during the Clone Wars had taken most of his former cadets, and the worst of those losses included Gentis' own sons. Gentis saw the new empire not as a government, but as a meat grinder. His response was a coup. Coordinated explosives went off across Imperial-occupied Galactic City within a single minute. The follow-up strike was a cloud of Aorth-6, an engineered virus released directly into the Emperor's throne room. Palpatine survived the only way he could, by holding the toxin at bay with the corrupting influence of the Force and refusing to die. Vader arrived in the throne room with two men. The first was Moff Tracta, a heavily cybernetic officer who would later orchestrate his own conspiracy. The second was a young, crippled lieutenant named Larita Tome, the Academy's valedictorian, a cadet who, by all counts, should not have survived the day. Tome survived, and so did Palpatine. Barely. The three men carried the Emperor off Coruscant. The destination was a place Vader remembered from his life as Anakin Skywalker. It was called the Prism, a Jedi black site in the Diab system used during the Clone Wars to hold prisoners the Council could not officially process. Anakin had captured many of those prisoners himself. Now, as Vader, he knew exactly where they had gone. 207 of them were still alive inside. He freed them all and turned the chamber into a tournament fought for the right to serve the Empire. Only 33 survived. Those 33 were handed to Moff Tracta as the foundation of a new elite Imperial unit, and the rest were left behind as the price of admission. The coup ended the way coups under Palpatine usually ended. Tarkin, summoned to Coruscant to be tested, was intercepted and proven loyal. The conspirators were lined up and put down. Gentis himself was struck down by Palpatine personally with Force lightning, while the old general was holding his dying son, Call, in his arms. Tracta was elevated to Grand Moff. The crippled cadet Tome was promoted to Admiral. That promotion lasted a day. Vader threw Larita Tome off a balcony. The reasoning was simple. Tome had been too capable. He had survived the bioweapon and the prison tournament. He had earned his rank in front of Palpatine. The rule of two did not allow for a third figure that promising to keep climbing. The advice Vader offered as Tome went over the railing was 3 words: never suffer rivals. The Empire was told that the new admiral had been called away to a distant assignment. The Sith Lord, who had just helped save the Empire, had already begun the quiet work of making sure no Imperial in uniform would ever rise high enough to take his place. Vader had saved his master, built his own private army, and ended his most promising lieutenant. On a quiet planet in wild space, an artifact was waiting that promised him a way out of his master's shadow forever. Chapter 3: The First Escape. Earlier in the timeline, on the edge of the Outer Rim, a smuggling crate had turned up that should not have existed. The crew of the freighter Humile was trying to get rid of it. The crate refused to leave their hold easily. Word of the cargo reached the Empire, and from there, it reached Vader. The Dark Lord recognized the markings on the metal. Whatever was inside had been buried for 4,000 years. In the crossover comic Star Wars Dark Times Vector, Vader caught up to the freighter on a remote desert moon. The crate was opened in front of him. Inside was a stasis tube called Drapa's Oubliette, and inside the Oubliette was a Jedi Knight named Celeste Morn, a Covenant operative who had been alive after 4 millennia, still holding the artifact she had been buried with. The artifact was the Moore Talisman. Its previous owner had been a Sith Lord named Carnes Moore, and his consciousness was still inside it. The talisman promised exactly what Vader wanted most at that stage of his life: more power, an army of his own, and a way out from under Palpatine. The deal was offered immediately: take Morn as an apprentice, claim the talisman, command the Rakghoul plague that turned living beings into Old Republic predators, and end Palpatine within the year. For a moment, Vader considered it. He had worn the suit for less than a year by then, and the Cold War with his master was already a daily problem. But Moore's consciousness would not stay quiet inside an apprentice's mind. Whoever wore the artifact would eventually become Moore. Trading enslavement to Palpatine for enslavement to Moore was not a way out. It was the same cage, with different bars. He refused. Morn, who had spent 4,000 years watching Carnes Moore eat people from the inside out, agreed with him. She refused to hand the talisman over, and refused to let him take her. The duel that followed was short. Vader was the stronger fighter, but Morn held the talisman, and the talisman had options. She turned it on the clone troopers Vader had brought to the moon, and they were transformed into Rakghouls inside their own armor. The plague spread through Vader's landing force in minutes. The Sith Lord retreated from the moon, with the artifact still in Morn's possession. But the retreat was not what mattered most. The historian acting as the buyer for the Humile's cargo at the meeting on Eridus, Thane Patori, had been Vader's agent from the beginning. The crate had never been the smugglers to sell. The bigger problem was not Morn, it was the Emperor. Vader left the desert moon with a lesson he would carry for years. Existing Force users came with their own histories and their own masters. If the Dark Lord wanted a partner he could trust, he was gonna have to build one from scratch. Vader had refused one chance at escape. The next one would not be an artifact, it would be a child, raised across the long years to come in total secret. Chapter 4: Shadows on Coruscant. The rain on Coruscant fell in narrow streets that had not seen direct sunlight in centuries. Captain Gregor Typho stood at the back of one of those streets with a blaster raised, watching the cybernetic shape of Darth Vader move closer through the runoff. Typho had loved Padme Amidala like a sister. The reports out of Mustafar had named the new Sith Lord. He had taken her life. Typho pulled the trigger. Vader survived the shot. He had survived worse by then. Later, in Coruscant Nights 2, Street of Shadows, Captain Typho asked whether any part of Anakin Skywalker still remained inside the suit. Vader answered that the man Typho was searching for was dead. The hunt that brought Vader into that alley had begun 3 months earlier. Across the Coruscant Nights trilogy, Jedi Twilight, Street of Shadows, and Patterns of Force, Vader's obsession centers on one specific survivor of Order 66. The Jedi was Jax Pavan, one of Anakin Skywalker's fellow Temple students. To Pavan, Vader was simply another Imperial executioner. Vader, however, remembered exactly who he was hunting. The Dark Lord chased Pavan through Coruscant's lower levels and walked into traps set by an underground resistance cell called Whiplash. One of those traps involved a rare extract called Boda, a force-amplifying substance from the planet Drongar, which Vader actually swallowed in the third novel, believing it would strengthen his connection. The trip put him on the ground. The Whiplash leadership walked out the door while the Sith Sith Lord was lost inside his own head. Pavan survived every encounter, and Vader's pursuit dragged on longer than the Emperor expected. Eventually, Palpatine decided one Jedi hunter was not enough. Palpatine was already training a second apprentice. In The Last of the Jedi, the candidate was Ferrus Olin, once Anakin Skywalker's rival as a Padawan, who was pushed out of the Order years before the Clone Wars ended. The Emperor offered him a path back to power, with the apprenticeship waiting if Olin proved strong enough. The unspoken half of the offer was that the position would only open when Vader was no longer alive to fill it. Vader was told what Palpatine had done, and Vader's answer to it was Roan Lands. Lands was Olin's closest friend and business partner on the planet Balassa, and in Secret Weapon, the 7th book in the series, Vader went there personally. He found Roan Lands in front of Ferrus Olin in a public square, and he ended him there. The Dark Lord was not going to be replaced by a man who had not yet earned it. Olin watched his closest friend fall and could do nothing to stop it. There was one Sith Lord in the suit, and the suit was not vacating its position for anyone the Emperor decided to elevate. The Cold War had taken on a public shape, with proxies dying for it. Vader had spent years chasing Jedi shadows on Coruscant, but the most powerful weapon he ever built wasn't an artifact, wasn't a backup apprentice, and wasn't anyone Palpatine knew about. It was a child. Chapter 5: The Secret Apprentice. In a wooden hut on Kashyyyk, the boy watched his father reach for a lightsaber that was already gone. The Jedi Kento Marek had hidden himself among the Wookiees since the end of the Clone Wars, raising his son in secret on a world where the Empire's stormtroopers did not yet patrol. The figure who walked through the door that morning was the one Jedi survivors had been told to fear. Kento Marek fell to Vader inside his own house. The fight was over before it began, and then something happened that the Dark Lord had not expected. The dead Jedi's lightsaber, lying on the floor between them, lifted into the air and flew into the hand of a small boy who had never been trained for anything. Vader silenced his own stormtroopers that day, not because they had failed, because they had seen what he was about to do. The Imperial detachment that had accompanied the Dark Lord to Kashyyyk did not leave the hut alive. Every man who knew about the child was eliminated on the spot, and the existence of Galen Marek was buried inside Vader's personal files. Palpatine could never be allowed to learn that an apprentice of that potential existed in the galaxy, because the rule of two would demand the boy either replace Vader or be eliminated outright. Either outcome was unacceptable. The Dark Lord took the child back to his unfinished flagship, the Super Star Destroyer Executor, and hid him in a chamber that did not appear on any deck plan. For 15 years, the most powerful weapon in the galaxy was being raised in a hidden chamber aboard a ship the Empire had not even finished building. The code name was Starkiller. The boy was given no other identity and told nothing of his real name. He was trained by Vader directly when the Dark Lord could afford the time, and by a holodroid called Proxy when he could not. Proxy's primary function was unusual. The droid was programmed to assume the appearance of Jedi Masters and attempt to take the boy's life during routine sessions. A Sith apprentice raised in safety would not survive the first real ambush. One raised under constant attempts on his life would. Galen survived the attempts. He survived the punishing sessions Vader subjected him to whenever the Dark Lord returned from mission. He survived the years of isolation that came with being a secret no one in the Empire was permitted to know. By the time he was a young adult, he was, by every measurable standard, the most powerful Force user Vader had ever produced. The Cold War with Palpatine had been waiting for exactly that moment. By roughly 3 BBY, Vader judged the boy ready. The first missions were Jedi hunts. Each target had been a senior Jedi who would survive Order 66 by going underground. The first was General Ram Koda, a veteran of the Clone Wars who was attacking the TIE construction facility above the smuggler's moon of Nar Shaddaa. Koda fought Starkiller across the breaking decks of the shipyard, lost the duel, and was left blinded but alive. The second was Kazdan Paradis, a Jedi who had retreated to the junkyards of Raxus Prime and built himself a hollow recreation of the Jedi Temple out of scrap. Paradis did not survive his fight. Third was Master Shaak-Ti, who had hidden on the jungle world of Felucia and trained a local resistance. Shaak-Ti did not survive either. 3 Jedi survivors of Order 66, all masters of their craft, all taken down inside a single arc by an apprentice the Emperor did not know existed. The boy's pilot through all of this was Juno Eclipse, a former Imperial captain reassigned to fly Starkiller's prototype starship, the Rogue Shadow. Eclipse was a soldier first, not a believer. Her role was meant to be entirely operational. It did not stay operational. Starkiller, who had spent his entire life inside a windowless chamber, met the first person who looked at him as more than a weapon. The attachment that formed between them was not something Vader had planned for. Starkiller was ready. The three Jedi were gone. The plan was about to come together, and then Vader betrayed him in front of the Emperor. Chapter 6: The Founding Trap. In the throne room aboard the Executor, Darth Vader drove his lightsaber through Galen Mark's chest while the Emperor watched from above. The apprentice Vader, who had spent years shaping into a weapon against Palpatine, collapsed to the deck without a sound. Palpatine had arrived unexpectedly, and Vader had been forced into a choice: kill Starkiller himself or be replaced by an apprentice that the Emperor had already started preparing. Vader chose the lightsaber, and Starkiller's body was thrown out an airlock, but Vader never intended for the death to last. The Dark Lord recovered the body. The recovery was carried out by a small Imperial detachment loyal to Vader personally on the science vessel Empirical, where a team of medical droids worked for weeks to bring the boy back. The designation given to him during the reconstruction was Subject 1138. When Starkiller woke up, he was told two things. The first was that his death had been staged. The second was that the Cold War Vader had been fighting across his entire post-Mustafar career was about to enter its final phase, and Starkiller was the weapon. The boy was given a new mission. He would travel to Bail Organa, Mon Mothma, Garm Bel Iblis, and Ramkota, the four most credible voices of the Resistance left in the galaxy, and convince them to gather in one place to form an alliance. The location was Corellia. The signing was scheduled for 2 BBY. Starkiller did the work. The four leaders met in secret on Corellia in the year planned. The pact they signed there was called the Corellian Treaty, and it would become the founding document of the Rebel Alliance. It was also a trap. Vader had not sent Starkiller to build an alliance. Vader had sent Starkiller to bait one. The whole point of gathering the four Resistance leaders in a single room was to remove them from the galaxy in a single afternoon. Imperial forces arrived at the Corellian estate within minutes of the signing. All four were captured alive and taken aboard the still unfinished first Death Star, where Palpatine was waiting personally to deal with them. Starkiller was supposed to be there too. He was supposed to be at his master's side, watching the foundation of any future resistance get put down in front of him. The boy did not do that. Starkiller turned on Vader. In the light side ending of The Force Unleashed, the official Legends version, Starkiller fought his way through the Death Star, freed the four senators, and held off Palpatine and Vader long enough for them to escape aboard a stolen shuttle. He did not survive the fight. The last action of his life was choosing, for the first time, what he wanted his weapon to do. He gave his life so the people Vader had been trying to capture could keep running. The Empire was told that the rebellion had been crushed before it began. The galaxy was told nothing at all. The four senators, hidden somewhere in the Outer Rim, knew exactly what had just happened. They had been gathered together to be ended. They had been saved by the apprentice of the Sith Lord who had organized the trap. They would not let Starkiller's choice mean nothing. Princess Leia Organa proposed a symbol. She selected the Marek family crest, the only thing Galen had carried out of his father's hut on Kashyyyk all those years ago. The crest was redrawn, adopted formally by the founding senators, and added to every banner, fighter, helmet, and broadcast the new Rebel Alliance would put out for the next 30 years. The Starbird, the symbol that Luke Skywalker would eventually fly under at the Battle of Yavin, was not an ancient emblem of the Old Republic and not a creation of Mon Mothma's staff. It was the family crest that the boy Darth Vader had stolen from his father, raised in secret across the long years of his training, struck down in front of an emperor, brought back to life, sent to gather the rebellion's founders into a single room, and tried to use the bait in a trap. The rebellion existed because of Vader's failed conspiracy, and its symbol belonged to the apprentice he had betrayed. Starkiller was gone, but Vader could not let him go. So he did the only thing a man like Vader could do. He made another one, and then he made hundreds. Chapter 7: The Last Years. On a stormy planet at the edge of the galaxy, a rebel strike force was about to do something no one in the Empire's Imperial era record had managed. The planet was Kamino. The defenders were Vader's own clones, and in a vat on the cloning facility's lowest level, a young man with Galen Marek's face was waking up for the third time in 2 years. In The Force Unleashed 2, the answer to what Vader had been doing since the Corellian Treaty was cloning. The Kamino facility, the same one that had produced the original clone army for the Republic, had been quietly repurposed by Vader for a single project. Galen Marek was to be reproduced at speed, in volume, with every accelerated accelerated growth technique the Kaminoans could provide. Hundreds of attempts failed, but 2 reached completion. The first retained fragments of Galen's memories, including a face he could not stop dreaming about. The second was something else entirely, pale-skinned, red-eyed, and obedient. The Dark Apprentice was the result Vader had been hunting for. The first clone, designated Subject 1138, was the result Vader had not wanted to keep. Subject 1138 broke out of his containment chamber driven by the memory of one person. Juno Eclipse, the pilot who had once flown Starkiller across half the galaxy, was the only thing the clone remembered clearly. Vader, anticipating this, had already hired Boba Fett to track Eclipse down and bring her in as bait. The clone escaped Kamino, made his way to the gladiator arenas of Cato Neimoidia, and pulled General Ram Koda out of Baron Marillion Tarko's fighting pit. Koda had not seen Starkiller since the trap on Corellia. He recognized the face. He did not recognize the man, and then the clone walked aboard a rebel cruiser and told General Koda that the rebellion was about to launch an assault on Kamino, with him at the front of it. The assault on Kamino in 1 BBY ended with Darth Vader on his knees. The fight, captured in the canonical light side ending of The Force Unleashed 2, was personal in a way the Cold War had never allowed itself to be in public. Starkiller fought through Vader's clone defenders, broke into the central cloning chamber, and confronted his maker directly. The duel was short. Vader, the same Dark Lord who had once been cut on Kessel by Su Choi at the sword arm, was struck down on Kamino by an apprentice he had betrayed and rebuilt. He was not finished off. The clone chose to take him alive, and the rebel troops boarded the chamber, restrained the Dark Lord of the Sith, and carried him out of the facility as a prisoner. For a few hours, the Rebel Alliance had Darth Vader in its custody. Then, a second ship lifted off after them. Boba Fett, hired to bring in Juno Eclipse, was, by the closing seconds of Force Unleashed 2, no longer the one being hired. He was the one watching. The Rebel shuttle disappeared into hyperspace, and Fett followed. Palpatine had known about Kamino the entire time, and every secret Vader had been built under observation. By the time Vader returned to active service, the Great Jedi Purge was almost over. On the forest world of Kofrigan 5, an exiled Jedi Master named Anya Kuro had been hiding across the entire Imperial period. In the Darth Vader Extinction comic, Kuro had been called the Dark Woman during her years in the Order, a teacher who had taken Ki-Adi-Mundi as a Padawan, and a figure Anakin Skywalker had known of in the temple. Mara Jade, the Emperor's hand, located her first and reported the find back to Coruscant. Mara wanted it for herself. Palpatine, understanding what Kuro's presence in the galaxy still meant, assigned her instead to Vader. Some closures had to be handled by the Sith Lord, whose past she belonged to. The duel on Kofrigan 5 was personal in a way the rest of the Purge had never been. Kuro told Vader, between blows, that some paths were easier to walk for a coward. She disarmed him once. Vader, recovering, severed a tree at its base with his lightsaber and let the trunk fall. Kuro was pinned, and the fight ended there. Her body vanished into the Force the way old Jedi sometimes did. Her Force ghost appeared to Vader a moment later. In the original 2-issue version of the story, the name it used to address him was the name Captain Typho had asked about in a Coruscant alley years before. The name Vader had told Typho was dead. The ghost called him Anakin. The Empire was told that the Purge had ended successfully. The galaxy was told that the Jedi were finished. Palpatine reassigned the Dark Lord to a new project that needed personal oversight. The project was a weapon the size of a moon. In the novel Death Star, construction was nearing completion, and Tarkin was the commander on station. Vader, returning to his bridge after nearly 20 years of secret apprentices and private armies, was no longer the Empire's primary weapon. The Death Star was. His new function was supervisory. He walked the lower decks, oversaw the architects, and on one occasion mentally probed a designer named Tila Kars to test her loyalty. Kars, a political prisoner pressed into the construction crew, held her mind shut against him. Vader, who had not encountered a mind like that in years, moved on and left her alive. 19 years after Mustafar, the Jedi were gone, the Empire ruled the galaxy, and Darth Vader was about to chase a princess across the stars and meet a son he did not know existed. The legacy of those 19 years did not disappear when Vader returned to his bridge. Every piece of work the Dark Lord had quietly built between Mustafar and Yavin kept running after the Death Star reached the Yavin system. The Nogri continued serving the Empire from a poison home world they did not yet know had been poisoned on purpose. They would keep serving until 9 ABY, when a senator's daughter named Leia Organa walked into their camp, and the warrior caste recognized on her skin the scent of the Dark Lord they had called Savior. They call Vader's bloodline Malariush. Leia carried it. The Nogri defected to her on the spot. and the private army Vader had built off the Imperial ledger turned out, in the end, to belong to his own daughter. General Rom Koda, the Jedi Vader's apprentice had blinded on the Nar Shaddaa shipyards and rescued from a Cato Neimoidian fighting pit, became one of the founding generals of the Rebel Alliance. He flew the Marek family crest into every operation he commanded. Celeste Morn and the Mor Talisman remained dormant on the Desert Moon, where the Vector arc had left them, a trap Vader would attempt to spring on Luke Skywalker, Leia Organa, and Han Solo years later in the Dark Horse Rebellion series. The Inquisitorius continued hunting the few Jedi who would slip through the official purge. The Dark Apprentice clone, the obedient replacement Palpatine had walked out of Camino with, vanished from Imperial records. By the time A New Hope opened, Vader was a passenger on his own flagship. Tarkin gave the orders. The Death Star was the weapon. The Sith Lord, who had spent 2 decades building secret apprentices, private armies, and Force artifacts to use against his master, was reduced to walking the corridors of a station he had not designed and had not asked for. The Cold War he had spent his entire post-Mustafar life fighting was over, and he had lost it without ever firing the move he had been building towards. Quick note before you go, members get early access and a few videos that stay off the main channel. If that's interesting, the link is in the description. Otherwise, here's another video you might like.